Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all well. I'm Daniel Benjamin. I'm the director of the Dickey Center, and this is our very first edition of the Dickey Center Beyond the Campus. It's a virtual event, and I'm delighted to welcome Juliette Kayyem to be our distinguished guest tonight. Just a note on the format. This is a meeting of the Dickey Center's War and Peace Fellows, and our traditional way of doing these meetings is that we ask our speaker to give a short autobiography. So I will just begin by saying that Juliette Kayyem is the former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security. Most of you know her from her many appearances as an analyst on CNN. She was an advisor to Governor Deval Patrick in Massachusetts. She's written a great book called Security Mom. And, you know, she is one of the foremost public voices on public security issues today. She had a lot of experience with emerging infectious disease while she was in government, and I'm going to let her tell you about this. Just so you know, she will speak for a while, and then Professor Ben Valentino, who's also here, will be submitting questions to her that are coming through the chat function. And with that, Juliette, welcome. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here, Daniel, and and we had worked together in the Obama administration and many times after, and I hope everyone is healthy and staying healthy and engaged. And I was thrilled to do this, not only because of my relationship with you and the center, but because I think it's really important that people hear where we are and actually where we're going. So any opportunity I can get, I'm grateful. I was first asked to sort of talk about my career, which I describe because it's many paragraphs long. I say that I have had one career, but many jobs. So it's, you know, I've been sort of in the Homeland Security risk reduction space, started off in counterterrorism as a lawyer, then moved into policy work and academic work, back into state government, then federal government. Have always had media and corporate advising and corporate work in the background when I'm out of government, and now I'm a professor at Harvard's Kennedy School and do a lot of sort of work trying to communicate what's going on. So it's a lot of different pieces, but they all sort of have the same thing, which is thinking about risk reduction and Homeland Security. And each of those has been sort of not predetermined. In particular, I got into counterterrorism in the 90s, not because I was particularly fascinated in counterterrorism. I was a civil rights attorney, and there were a bunch of counterterrorism cases coming after the Oklahoma City bombing, cases that were implicating civil rights and civil liberties. They were against Muslim and Arab men. Their due process rights were being questioned. And the Attorney General at the time, Janet Reno, had asked me to serve as sort of a naysayer of the counterterrorism cases. In other words, I was put in as the civil rights attorney to, not naysayer, but to make sure that the government powers were used appropriately. That then led to an appointment on the National Commission on Terrorism. And, you know, to say that I had no plan for my career, found myself in Massachusetts because my husband had gotten a faculty position at Harvard Law School, pregnant with our first child, unemployed, and thinking I had to I think I was getting paid like $500 a month. Here I had been a lawyer for the Attorney General, $500 a month, and as a fellow at the Kennedy School, and thought I have to get out of this. Like I have to get out of counterterrorism. There's no future in it professionally. And then of course 9/11 happened. So, you know, sometimes we get impacted by the world around us. That actually ended up being true as well in the trajectory of Homeland Security in my career. If you think of 2001 as being sort of about Homeland, you know, about stop the post 2001 world being about stopping essentially 19 guys from getting on, you know, 4 airplanes. my field, Homeland Security, had a course correction in 2005, which was, of course, Hurricane Katrina, when a nation realized that, you know, if you focus too much on one thing, you're going to neglect another. And that really coincided with sort of my growing interest in how do we think about protecting a nation from all threats. So we now describe Homeland Security, or at least we did until it sort of became only about border enforcement, as the secure flow of people, goods, ideas, and networks. That's a term that I use to describe, because to describe what it is we're trying to do. Because honestly, yeah, as Dan, like the security part's kind of easy. I oversaw the Boston Marathon planning before the bombings. Like, I know how to have a perfectly safe Boston Marathon. I don't have one. I know how to have perfectly safe air travel. I don't have it. Like, I get that. That's really easy to do. The hard part is, how do you have flow that sort of represents who we are as a nation? And so that's sort of the professional side. I have 3 kids, one who's home from Brown and not happy about that. And the book I wrote, and why, for all of its flaws, even cable news, I like using media platforms to describe what's going on. And the book, which ended up being a memoir, didn't start that way. I wanted to write a book about sort of what it was like working in Homeland Security. And, you know, in my field, we don't really, especially if you're a woman, you sort of don't sort of acknowledge the family side of stuff. But thought, you know, the best way to describe it would be as a, you know, the similarities between the home and the homeland, and really what the similarities of trying to protect our communities. That's essentially what we're doing. So I told the story of Homeland Security and crisis management through the lens of also being a mother of 3, and, you know, really value my platforms now, you know, with the Atlantic and CNN and NPR and, well, the WGBH down here, just as an opportunity to describe something that's complicated. In fact, I get sort of annoyed at people who sort of, experts who sort of poo-poo that, because I actually think it's a responsibility on our part to try to get good messaging out and to try to be responsible in that regard. So that's basically the career side, and then sort of where we are and how do I think about Homeland Security, and in particular the coronavirus, in the context of national security. So what I didn't say during that long buildup was the extent to which Homeland Security was viewed as sort of the sort of second tier of national security, and Dan probably wouldn't disagree with that. You know, we are sort of the riffraff, and, you know, we, you know, yeah, we're great, and, you know, we, you know, go out and when there's a hurricane and stuff, but it's not considered intellectually rigorous. It's you know, it's a bunch of TSA agents at the airport, and they're not doing anything anyway. You know, like it wasn't the fancy diplomats at the State Department or the military or the super squirrely spies or even the lawyers. We were sort of, we had, you know, we were created out of 9/11 in the Bush era. No one, you know, everything was absurd and extreme. And why do we even have this department anyway? And so getting Homeland Security to be viewed as an essential part of the national security apparatus has taken a really long time. I don't think anyone needs convincing now. I think, you know, to the extent that the globalization of the world, and it's not just pandemics, means that the threats that once we thought we could deal with as, you know, diplomatic threats or military abroad threats or covert actions abroad threats actually are coming here. And so that's, you know, that's not just terrorism or even the rise of right-wing terrorism, it's climate change, and why the world responding or trying to minimize climate change matters to us and our American cities and how we live. It's cybersecurity. You know, someone in the Philippines going to have a dramatic impact on our critical infrastructure. And now, of course, it's pandemic. So, you know, so that's important to remember. I think a second thing, so that's maybe a good legacy, the extent to which public health and global health and its impact on our Homeland Security are relevant. The second issue that you're seeing in this is, I think, unique to Homeland Security in the national security space. So national security, we're very used to our president, whoever it is, acting as commander-in-chief. In fact, there's case law against states having separate foreign policies. You can't, if a president has a prohibition on trade with a country, Massachusetts can't say, but we like that country, we'll have trade, our companies will have trade with it. We have in the past, we speak in one voice. We in the past, have sort of viewed that role as unitary, though there's checks on it, but as unitary. This is very different, and I think it's like the national security apparatus is like trying to get their head around it. In the Homeland, we don't talk about chain of command or that sort of idea of the commander-in-chief speaking in one voice and then everyone falls in line. You're seeing it. His name is Governor Cuomo. His name is Governor, Inslee. Or Governor Newsom, right? The Homeland, the challenge of Homeland Security is a governance challenge. It is about how do you integrate local, state, territorial, and tribal governments? Don't forget our tribes. They have special status, as they should. How do you integrate them with a federal effort? And what I've never seen before is how the president seems to have a national security hat on when dealing with the Homeland, because he talks about a federal response, right? This is all the debate about supplies and tests, and we have to get stuff for ourselves while the states have to get stuff for themselves. This is so inconsistent with our notion of both, crisis response, but also unity of effort, right? That's what a president does. States, you've heard it a million times, right? Locals execute, states coordinate, feds support. It's the way Homeland works. The frontline responders are the ones in the hospitals, the cops, the firefighters, then the state manages all that. So this is very unique. The third thing I want to say about the coronavirus in the context of national security is that we are likely to be the least successful country in dealing with coronavirus by miles, like by multitude of deaths. It's inexcusable when you think about South Korea. Part of it is obviously those lost months where we didn't do anything in response. Part of it is the failure to impose very strict social distancing at the beginning that would have impacted all of these areas. And then of course, getting ready for supplies through mechanisms like the Defense Production Act and others. So our response is abysmal. And I've been in crisis responses. I get, they're horrible, and you're used to everyone saying they're horrible, but we're not using the right tools right now. And so, in terms of what that says to the world, that is, I think, a real legacy for us that we are going to have to deal in the years to come. We are broken. There's a big story in the Atlantic yesterday or the day before that, the coronavirus essentially found a failed state. It's a little bit much. I don't agree with all of it, but it's an interesting take, which is, if you're a country that is looking for a model, right? I'm not sure we're the model you want right now, right? I mean, in other words, and we've always sort of viewed ourselves as, well, we're functioning, we know how to deal with stuff, and what's happening now, and the likelihood, 44,000 deaths. I won't say numbers. It's not going to be 60,000. Let's just put it that way. It's not going to be the White House's floor. And we're, and I don't think it's going to be 1 million, but my jaw doesn't drop if we say 400,000, right? Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is, who has my slide? Is what to expect in the years ahead, because you guys all want to know what's going on with your life as well. Is it Ben? Yes, hi. Tom, sorry. So I wanted to, so something I do a lot of corporate advising, and I do a lot of advising for mayors and stuff, just because, you know, most mayors are, you know, from education background or financial background, or just, you know, community activists. They're not in this space that I've lived in terms of Homeland Security. I'm gonna go quickly through it, but the bad news is the virus is new. The good news is crisis management is not. So I put this together because I thought it'd be helpful to ground people on sort of where we are. Crises have 5 stages. Protection is the one that you hoped we would have invested in a long time ago. Stronger global health systems, better food security, strong identification systems. We all know that the Chinese were lying at some stage. I think there's not a monolithic China. There were changes over time. Then you get to prevention, which is, okay, I know the threat is out there. What as a nation, this is a US focused chart, do I wish I could have, what do I want to do to make sure that when that threat comes, fewer people die? That's what we're calling squandered time. That was January, February, and early March, when the White House clearly knew about the threat and didn't prepare us, didn't prepare testing kits. And I think really important, didn't protect the frontline workers, but I think really importantly, we forget this, didn't protect the public. You know, didn't prepare the public. I mean, in other words, the shock of what happened to all of us that day in which life was normal and then life wasn't normal is, you know, there was nothing, we weren't acclimated to it, right? Because the president had been denying it. Then you have your boom, and this, you know, it's a challenge when you have a slow roll boom, because there's no moment of activation like a hurricane. You know when to respond if you're a first responder. And then you have the response. You all know what the response is. We're living in it. We're trying to flatten the curve. Citizens are engaged and motivated, the public sector, and of course institutions like Dartmouth or Harvard or Brown, or, you know, all of them weighing what, you know, all of them, I think, differently, because I know all 3 schools sort of making judgment calls on you know, where you are and when you come back. But I want to end with this, and then the 5th is resiliency. What did we learn from this? I think it's really important to realize what we're heading towards. Everyone's talking about opening up. I think there's going to be premature opening up. I don't think we'll have enough test kits, and I think and we'll see. I mean, honestly, we'll just see. You know, as I said, 60,000 would be a good day. It's a horrible number to say. But I think given the premature openings and the fact that we're still on the curve, and the fact that we can't curb out-of-state travel, I don't see how we're not going to have massive pockets of people dying. I mean, it's just the nature of what's happening. And no country opening up is doing it like we are. When you hear that a country opens up, it's not just that they have the testing and the tracking. You know, they're opening up parks and allowing only 2 people at a time, right? So, I mean, in other words, like opening up Florida beaches and allowing everyone on, that's not what other countries are doing. When they open up their beaches, they'll have like 20 people on it, right? You know, but, you know, we live with what we live with, but I want to just describe in the ending sort of what I think about the next 2 to 3 years, if we're lucky. I hear from sources, you heard it here first, that the WHO is going to have a very promising announcement tomorrow about vaccines. That there's some leaking of the story already, that there's already doing trial testing in Britain and Germany. I think they have something good, which would be it would be a game changer. Now look, if they have the vaccine, it's still going to take months and months and months to manufacture and then distribute globally. But nonetheless, if you think of the vaccine as the only way you get rid of the virus, you're essentially killing the virus. We've got some period of time between there. And that is not opening up. It's not normal. It's not even the new normal. It is what I've been calling adaptive recovery. Normally we have plain old recovery. A hurricane comes and goes, and you respond, and then you recover. That's the nature of a crisis. We will be recovering, living with the virus, managing around it, trying to avoid it, trying to box it in, trying to dance with it. You pick your analogy, but we're not trying to dance with it actually, but we will adapt to live and manage the virus in real time. It will be evolution, survival of the fittest on a daily basis. It means that you may go to a store one day, it's closed for 2 weeks because an employer is sick. Restaurants will be at half, if even. Waiters will wear gloves and masks. Bars are going to, the bar experience will be different. I don't think movie theaters will be opening up in this time period. Full plastic face mask might be anticipated for sports. If you play golf, it is your era. Dating apps will require your medical background if you want to play, and courtships will be very different, just given the nature of the disease. Religion and being together, responsible religious leaders will not hold masses. We will do Zoom funerals. So all of it will change. We will be adapting to what we think. We will be adapting to its presence with us. So I've been calling it, just to end, the now normal. The new normal makes it sound like like we're just trying to get there. The now normal is like every day is going to be wild, right? I mean, and the good news is we will have more tools to deal with it than we do now. All we have now is social distancing. We will have more testing. I'm pretty confident of that. It's taken egregiously long time. We will have more tracking capability. Employers will insist on a certain employee behavior and testing. We won't be able to get on, we'll be doing more temperature testing. We'll have better treatments, which I've been very optimistic about in terms of getting healthy. And so so the way to think about it is, we're getting through this stage, and then it's the longest phase is the one that many of you will be dealing with in most of your college experience. I mean, it is just the way it is. No, I got a college student, you can say sorry only so many times, but it will, the years you thought you were going to have will be different. They won't be horrible like this, but they will be different, and we have to accept that and learn to live with it. Okay, I talked too long, so I'm happy to take any questions, but that's how I think about the road ahead, just given my experience in all of this stuff. So you could put that down now. Thanks.
Thank you, Juliette. That was a really excellent way to get this started. We are really fortunate to have you with us.
Thank you.
I think everybody right now is trying to figure out what to make of this new world.
Yeah.
And there are a few people who can help guide us more than you can. So we're really glad that you joined us here. It's a great opportunity for the group. I wanted to make an announcement to the group about how we'll conduct things going here on out. And then I'll ask a question, and I think Dan has one, and then we'll open it up to everybody. So we're going to use the chat function to ask questions, and I'm going to try to pull first from students, especially those in the War and Peace Studies Fellows Program. So identify yourself when you ask a question, right. and I'll pick some. This is, again, part of the Zoom era, so you guys won't all see if somebody posts something terrible in the chat section. I'll read the good ones only. So that's the first thing to know. Second thing, just to let everyone know, we are recording, and this will probably go up online someplace. So if that's not okay with you, now is the time to run away. But hopefully you won't mind, and you'll stay with us, because I expect you'll learn something. All right, so my chance to get a question, and I'm really excited about this because I don't think there's anyone maybe better to ask it to than you. And that is, I'm sure you know about and have been reading about, on each of a number of ways in which we might have been prepared as a nation for this. We failed to be prepared, and often not because we did nothing at all, but because we took these kind of half measures. So the story of the ventilator that we tried to build, and ultimately the firm was sold to a larger company that quashed the project. The story of the reusable masks that the government tried to put together. And the list goes on and on of all the things that we tried to do and didn't do. We didn't have the ability to ramp up testing. All of these things, as you know very well, we didn't just find these things out now. The fact that we were trying them before indicates we knew we would need these.
Yes.
And we knew that a pandemic like this was coming at some point. And yet we did none of them. And as best I can see, almost no other nations had those capacities built in either. I haven't read about the country that had this huge stockpile of ventilators or an excess of the PPE to use and have no trouble now with that. Even South Korea, which has been lauded for all its testing, still had to significantly struggle to ramp that testing capability up. So why did we all fail so miserably to prepare for this thing that we saw coming for 20 or 30 years? And I know you were part of the response to H1N1, so you would have seen it then. Why couldn't we get our act together?
Yeah, so, and I'm glad you asked that. So, okay, so part of it, I think, is just the nature of the crisis itself. Part of it, I'll answer all three quickly. Part of it is the divide between health and security that exists, and then part of it is this administration, which is just worth saying. There was a unique failures on America's part that you're not really seeing in other countries. You're seeing countries act too late, but they're having much more centralized, nationalized focus. So the first is just, if you back on my slide, don't go back to it, but just, I say the nature of a slow roll crisis. It is easy to mobilize politically, operationally, if you've worked in government, bureaucratically, when the boom happens, the terror attacks, the hurricane, the earthquake, no one questions it. They see the bodies, right? And so, and the political push is that way. So this isn't exactly like a Hurricane 5, a Category 5 hurricane forming offshore and slowly coming here. It's like one, forming in South Korea, and then you wondering if it's coming. So that's the first, and that's true of all. I mean, that's true of climate change. Like, it's just, we know that we will not be able to sustain this kind of living, and yet we're not responding in kind. The second is, I think, this divide between global health and security that I was talking about, which is real. I'm the chair of the Security and Global Health Program at the Kennedy School. We exist because we had recognized that gap, that you had, one, you have to use security apparatus to deal with this stuff. The same challenges that exist in national security exist in global health: transparency, situational awareness, disinformation, and the mobilization of resources to protect a nation. And then the third is, I think, unique to this nation. I mean, it is a president who did not, once again, presidents matter. If a president says, in January, wow, let's get our act together, your act is generally gotten together, or at least better. And I think the denials of it, I remember we just had the 10th anniversary of BP oil spill, and, look, that was a freaking nightmare and a mess, but there, and we had a pivot in the middle and stuff, but nonetheless, whatever you say about it, an ocean, did not fall apart. The ocean came back within a year, and all crises are bad. But, the president famously said, to the team, close the damn well, right? That nothing else mattered. And I think that does matter. The second part of that, just quickly, is this administration reinvents the wheel every freaking single time. I mean, we have sophisticated crisis management apparatus. It isn't perfect. It needs to be changed. This is a 50-state crisis. we've never seen anything like this, whatever. From what I can tell, they, reinvented the testing kits that were, the good ones were offered to us from WHO. They tried to create ventilators that all you had to do was utilize the Defense Production Act and just take them. I mean, we're paying for them, but just take them. Why are we doing this stuff? They now have this complicated supply chain apparatus that isn't working, that involves, from what I can tell, 3 different supply chains. One is FEMA's usual one, which tends to work. You move stuff from point A to P. Vice President Pence's air traffic control thing that he calls, where they take stuff. And then you have the Jared Kushner scenario, which the Wall Street Journal reported today. He put 11 guys from a venture capital firm in FEMA to work supply chain for him. So anyway, so all three of them combined were part of it. And I guess, the Chinese were not truthful, so that didn't help.
Well, that is very helpful. Dan, did you have a question before we open it up to everyone?
Yeah, just very quickly. First of all, thanks again, Juliette, for a terrific talk. And I certainly don't agree with you about Homeland Security people being the second tier. And
that's what all the State Department people say.
Yeah, well, we political appointees are a little different. So, So look, if, in national security, if you can't prevent harm to your population, you're not doing national security. Right. And that's what Homeland Security does. So, I think you've wrapped it up quite well where the multiple failures are. I would just add to that, there was a moment in the late 1990s in the counterterrorism world, which I think you're probably pretty familiar with, when, we were worried about biological weapons. And as a result of that, the White House working with HHS, worked very intensively to get started on vaccines for things like anthrax and to upgrade medical surveillance in the United States, because the unique thing about biological weapons is they happen and you may not know about it for quite a while. So you need to have good medical surveillance. And, my sense was, and we've read a lot about the Bush administration being very agitated about this stuff as well, and through H1N1, is that basically there's a 20+ year history here, and we had exercised every single contingency except for a chief executive who didn't want to flip the switch. That's, my sense of it. I do think that you're absolutely right that as a nation, we overvalue F-35 fighter jets and undervalue the things that we need to do at home, which may be a little more pedestrian, like really funding health departments. So to bring it forward, I'm curious, we're all living in a welter of news. Would you favor a 9/11 type commission to sort all this out?
Absolutely, I would. I think I tweeted out a number yesterday. I don't have them right in front of me, but 23 NYPD officers died on 9/11. Actually, these are the right numbers. 30 have died from the coronavirus. So, in some ways, so if you're thinking of magnitude, right, this thing is going to pale in comparison to 9/11. It's not going to have that shock value because it obviously is nationwide. The pool of people dying tend to be those who are, already from vulnerable populations or isolated from community. This was what I was going to say about H1N1. One of the reasons why we were able to this is one of the reasons why we were able to mobilize for H1N1, just as an aside, is it was killing kids. Nothing gets a nation more mobilized than healthy kids, dying from the flu, right? So in other words, this is, older people, most of our, not most, but many are going to come from nursing homes. It's not going to have, it's horrible, but it's not going to have that moment like 9/11 did, but its consequences will be greater, I think, in terms of its impact on all of society. 9/11, was a impacted all of society, but its physical impact was limited to New York, DC, and Pennsylvania. This, everyone is going to be 2 steps removed from someone who died by the end of this. So yes, I do. And I think it's important, and it can begin with every president for the last 30 years has undervalued, global health and the likelihood of a pandemic. There's no question about it.
Ben, why don't we open it up to the audience?
Great.
Yes, we are getting questions in fast and furious. So I'm going to pick some off and read them to you.
Okay, good.
The first one comes from Elizabeth Garrison. Hi, Liz. And her question is, I think, quite relevant to what we just ended on. Do you think that the pandemic will now shift public opinion, making it easier to invest in long-term preparedness, and not just for pandemics, but other kinds of crises like climate change, broader public health issues, those sorts of matters?
So it's a good question. I mean, this is happening during an election year, so the takeaways are really hard to predict. I think there's going to be a seismic shift in public polling in terms of attitudes about what the government's obligations are. You're seeing big shifts in terms of, like, for example, elderly support for the president is way down. I don't know, I have the number right in front of me. You're seeing interesting dynamics with social distancing. Close to 70% of Americans fear, despite what you hear on cable news, 70% of Americans fear more coming out too soon than they do about the economy. I think people, I mean, this is miserable for a lot of people, but I think people think, well, the economy can't function if we have a virus sort of rampant in society and you have a healthcare system that's down. So I think you're seeing a sort of an appreciation for science, the star power of a Dr. Fauci. I think all of those will help with things like climate change. But I can't, it will depend on who the president is, right? I mean, in other words, it will be the choices we have are so extreme about how they'll approach science and how they'll approach immigration and border controls that I can't say whether this is the dawn of a new sort of New Deal, right? This is our generation's depression leading to
Social security or something like that.
Yeah, exactly, or healthcare.
Okay, now we have another question, this one from Jarrett, and the question is kind of the flip of what we've been talking about, and that's, beyond what we already know that we need to do, more PPE, more testing, and all of those things. Have you noticed things that we're still not preparing for that you think we need to start moving on? Is there any areas where you think we've just forgotten about this, but it's going to come back and bite us if we don't start working on it quickly?
Well, yeah. So the three areas I'm looking, at, one is obviously, even if we get over the curve, what if we have a resurgence? So all of those issues will replay. So that's why I like stockpiles. I like hoarding. I like federal government's hoarding. I mean, this is what I didn't understand. It's like, not like this stuff goes bad, just hoard it, right? And you can sell it. And so that's the first. The second area I'm concerned with is actually the supply chain for critical infrastructure, including food. We've been very lucky. Look, the supply chain is broken when it comes to the health support, masks and stuff like that. But I think for the most part, if you time it right, you're able to get most everything you want. In fact, the deprivations have always been because people panic. And so a market that's used to sort of selling this much of X, Y, and Z, had to sell 4X, 5X. So I am worried about it, not because of the personnel issue, that these manufacturing critical infrastructure places are ones in which people work close together. You have employers that may not be as sophisticated or kind. You have no health insurance. You have immigrant labor that's not likely to come forward. So I worry about that. And then the third, just to put this in your head, of other things that we need to worry about. There are plans, though. I mean, the one thing is that, if someone would just follow the plans, is we're going to hear much more about vaccines, I think, in the next couple of days. Then you're going to have manufacturing. So a lot of companies are going to spend a lot of money. That's great. This is like where you want biotech to like get super rich. And then, but then we have a distribution problem or challenge, which is it's going to have to be divided globally. We're not so special. I mean, but then once it gets here, think about that challenge. In previous pandemics or health issues, we have something called a pod system in the US. It's called points of distribution. So we essentially, the federal government will create points of distribution that then there's a prioritization. In this case, the priorities will be clear: health workers, doctors, first responders, frontline workers in the supply chain. But then who's after that? And the big question will be, do you vaccinate your elderly population more likely to die if they get it? And elderly, let me tell you, elderly is 60 plus. I'm 50. So I'm looking at that like thinking that sounds like a good idea. Or do you do the younger population, which is more likely to be carriers? That is as a mother of three, they can live, but they have to take care of me when I'm sick. But I don't, that is a question that no one is answering right now.
Do you know, where do international populations fit into that? I mean, are we going to vaccinate every healthy 30-year-old before we vaccinate one, elderly person with emphysema in France? Or
no. Each country would decide on its own. So the distribution isn't all in one. So what will happen is there'll be like it's just like there'll be manufacturing. There'll be 8 boxes.
But if we're producing faster here, so we have many more doses than France does.
We choose.
So I assume that means every American is going to get every dose produced here before we start giving it to anybody abroad, no matter how.
And the WHO will be a competitive player in this space, for countries that cannot have manufacturing, but we're likely to privatize it. It's not uncommon. But we have to do it. And then just think about like all the anti-vaxxers and or as I like to call them, pro-plague people. There's going to be a whole group of people that don't do it. And it's just, they need to be shamed and isolated and sent somewhere else.
Okay, now we have a question, I think, about, we could even generalize a little about longer term social impact of this. And that question comes from Colson, and he asks, will there be people fleeing from cities and trying to avoid density at all costs? Mm-hmm. And you might think of that as a kind of near term panic reaction. I'm guessing if that hasn't happened yet, probably is not. But is there going to be a longer term demographic shift where people don't want to live in these places anymore, and are we prepared for that kind of change?
I do. I think, part of it is going to be, which I didn't talk about before, it's going to be, a governor can say open up, a president can say open up. We are all going to have our own personal risk calculation in the years to come. So, as I said, I'm 50, I want to live many more years, I'm healthy. So I'm not going to a movie theater for the next 2 years, assuming that they exist. Or I'm going to think twice about, a big event or a mega event, right? I can wait 2 or 3 or 4 years. Maybe someone younger can't. I'm assuming 2 or 3 or 4 years. So I think, and I think part of that risk calculation is going to be, not just suburbs with experts. And the reason why, though, is not just density. The second will be the benefits of living in a city will not be at all clear. Restaurants, there won't be as many restaurants, there won't be as many concerts, right? So all these reasons why we live here. But the third is because employers won't be demanding you coming in. So you can have a job in Boston and live on a farm in New Hampshire, right? It's just, that's the nature of what's about to happen, because the office as we know it is over for the time being. I don't know how it comes back, or if it comes back normal, but we'll get cubicles and we'll do all sorts of stuff that will be really interesting. But putting people on mass transportation right now, I wouldn't do it unless they have to. And if I'm an employer, I would definitely not want my employees to do it without a mask or at all.
Yeah, I expect you're right, especially about the remote work. I think everyone's now getting experience with this, and the idea that won't change anyone's behavior when they come back. That seems crazy. I think people are going to find that this worked in certain
Yes.
settings at least, and that's going to be very attractive to some corporations. And
I have to say, I have a good friend who works at one of the big platforms, one of the big search firms, and he said, you know, they would have never thought, right? They think these kids just think out. He said there is a maturity issue that is interesting, that a lot of young industries like internet, like this is sometimes a kid's first job, right? So, and there's a maturing aspect of going into the office. He said they're monitoring like it per the hour, right? Like they're like, because they actually now think your real estate footprint could be less, right? So you're not going to, you're not buying it, you're not renting a fancy office in the middle of a downtown. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out in the in the generation that's in college now. Will they be making living choices because they won't have commutes?
yeah, this is going to seem more normal for a long time, I think.
Yeah.
Next question from Jim. It's an important one. What preparations, public protection, and security measures do you think we need to plan for in order to ensure the validity of the 2020 national and state elections? Have we really begun thinking about that well enough? How's that going to be handled at the state and federal levels? That's
a great, it's a great question. So I think, you know, I could be living in Never Never Land, but I do think I do think that the November election will be the combination of write-in, and you're seeing a move towards more mail-in ballots, combination of absentee ballots with the physical presence. I think it will be, will probably be okay. Obviously there could be a second wave, but chances are.
We can get that many ballots out in the time we have, or do we have to start printing them 2 months ago?
No, you could do, no. I think the timing is still, I think in August. And so you're seeing states now moving to it with obviously, actually it's not all Democratic governors, some Republican governors. So you're seeing craziness like in Wisconsin, but I think that was an aberration. And there's nothing, there was almost nothing more beautiful in the last 2 months than having the Supreme Court justice who said people have to vote lose. That was just like, okay. So I do think it is, I think conventions are done. I don't think the conventions will happen. And I think it'd be irresponsible for either party to have them. And campaigning as we know it will be over. I think they'll be cheaper, which is better. I think, the use of social media and other metrics or other opportunities which may help some more unknown candidates get some traction. But there's still going to be disinformation. So remember, I was actually looking at a picture of my, I got an email of an event I did in early February. I didn't know it at the time. It was my last public event at the RSA Cyber Conference. I had a keynote there. And, I'm in a dress and I'm outside. Like I can't, it's like you feel like a totally different person. And we had started talking about the coronavirus then. I had been writing about it because I'd been monitoring it in China. But it was about Russia and the election. And I was just re-listening to it and I was like, oh my God, like it's still there. And so I do worry about, we're clearly Russia's involved with disinformation in terms of the anti-social distancing rallies. They will continue with the sort of wink and a nod of a president to at least do some disinformation as regards 2020. So that I'm worried about that.
Is there any threat to to some interference, foreign interference in these absentee ballots? And even if that doesn't swing an election, it just undermines confidence if it comes out that somebody is submitting fake ballots.
Right. I think, it is, there's no evidence that they're any more or less vulnerable than absentee ballots or the capability of changing exploitation in the voting booth. I actually think if I were the Russian, I've always been playing this one out that from the Homeland Security side. If you were the Russians, and think about it, we're in the middle of a pandemic. If you're the Russians and you want to influence exactly what you say, not the votes themselves, but just people's sense of support in the election. Support in the election process and confidence in the election process. I would do something like, turn off the lights in all of Detroit, right? So that an African-American city in a swing state, 10,000 people, 20,000 people can't vote. I would do something that was not actually focused on the voting itself, but some support mechanism for the voting. I see the intelligence community has started to talk about it. They're not just talking about disruption to voting, which is hard to pick the right place. They're talking about it in terms of, they call it like the support apparatus, which I took to mean signals, electricity, stuff like that. Reverse 911, you have a message go out saying there's an active shooter or stuff like that.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
Okay, now a career kind of question. We have a lot of students who are interested in careers in public service, and a number who are trying to decide the best way to get there. Some want to go to law school before they go that route, some thinking about going right into government. So this one's from Sunny. And Sunny asks, could you please talk a bit more about your experience working as a civil rights lawyer in counterterrorism? Were folks working on counterterrorism receptive to you being there? What were your objectives and how challenging was it?
Oh, that's so great. God, I'm not asked about that period. So I was, I'd worked in death penalty appeals during my law school summer. I'd worked for Brian Stevenson, who many of you know, but he had a small shop in Alabama at the time. And I was like a real, I think I'm still progressive, but I think other people might question that, but at times, but really, I was litigating civil rights cases. I was throughout the South. I had education cases. And then the Attorney General, as I said, wanted a team. I think they were pretty receptive. So these cases were called the secret evidence cases. There were only about like 17 of them. Under the act, after the Oklahoma City bombing, as is often true, Congress responds to try to fix the thing that it wasn't. So they had all these new immigration rules. And one of the rules was it allowed the use of secret evidence in immigration proceedings in which the man, all of them Arab Muslim men, were accused of being terrorists. Well, if you're an ex-wife and your husband's left you, which was one of the cases for, someone younger, and you're in a custody battle and he's Arab, and Muslim, guess what you're going to claim, right? Because you're going to win that custody battle. And they could do it on secret evidence. So the man could never see the evidence against him. And then he's deported. So these cases started to leak out because the defense attorneys were saying, this is absolutely ridiculous. And so we sort of had angels on, I had sort of, justice on my side, even though it was against justice, in the sense like these cases were impossible to defend. And the Attorney General, people don't remember Janet Reno, but she, she was like a Florida DA. She was like Clinton's third choice. She was she was like 6'2", very hokey, and and she just she hated this stuff. She was an old school prosecutor who believed in showing evidence and stuff. So that was it. I think I was then appointed to the National Commission on Terrorism. That was like sort of firmly in national security. That appointment was not without its controversy. I am Arab American. My parents were Lebanese descent. The person who had been appointed had a lot of challenges with things that he had said. They pull him. He was a Muslim American activist, great guy. He just had said things that made him very vulnerable to some of the politics of the time. And I remember my husband reading the story of this and said, they're going to have to pick a Lebanese Christian, right? So I'm both Arab but not Muslim. Like, this is the politics, right? And he didn't have me in mind, but then I get on the National Commission on Terrorism. So I described that in my book. So that was great. The other thing I want to say about government and how you get into government, those of you interested in national security, I will tell you now, my most my federal job was the most exciting, as Dan will tell you, you're flown out here in your fancy situation room and all this stuff. My state government role was the most satisfying. I mean, I thought I did good things in federal government, but it's just like, sometimes you just feel like you're just like, there's a hose and all you're trying to do is just, make sure nothing terrible goes bad. State government and local government, even in our space, whether it's trade, globally, whether it's immigration issues and sort of being a welcoming state. Michigan has someone who used to work for me at Homeland Security. She's the governor's, sort of global representative, because states want to get investments, they want to get students. I was a Homeland Security advisor, so I was in the public safety apparatus. Really interesting work in that space. So don't think, oh, I'm interested in global affairs. State and local don't matter. A friend of ours that had been in the administration, Sheba Crocker, was an ambassador. Was she an? Yeah, I think she was an ambassador. No, not Sheba. Nina Hagopian was an ambassador, came back and is now the mayor of LA's, she's like a deputy mayor representing LA around the globe, including, lucky her, the 2028 Olympics. So there are some really interesting jobs in which you have global representation or impact or public safety that are state and local. So if you think, oh my God, the federal government is just a mess, go more locally.
That's a great suggestion. We have people in all the time talking about careers in the security space, and I don't think we've really talked about anything outside of the federal level. So that's really an important thing for our students to think about. Okay, another question. This one from Tish Lopez. And the question is, I'd like to ask about the reorganization of the Global Health Security and Biodefense organization within the National Security Council. How much might it have helped if that organization unit had still been around and the chain of command was a little clearer when all of this hit us? Yeah,
so that's a great question. So what I think you said what the question is asking is, so what we've now found out is that, or what we knew is that there was a pandemic directorate. So the NSC has different directorates dealing with different issues, from arms control, whatever. There was a pandemic preparedness directorate, which was disbanded. I am of the school that while it wasn't great, I think the bigger issue was under Bolton, the denigration of the entire Homeland Security staff, including the Homeland Security advisor, from equal to the National Security Advisor. And I want to name some names of people who had these jobs. Lisa Monica, serious people.
She came and spoke to our group last year.
Oh, good. Like John Brennan, right? Fran Townsend, serious people who had these jobs. And then it's demoted, not one, not two, I think 3 pecking orders under where it had to be. And this gets back maybe a little bit to my point at the beginning. The idea that you could do that for an apparatus that is, that represents the homeland, that you could denigrate in total thing, because access matters, right? The famous pictures of Lisa in the room telling the president about Sandy Hook, those things matter in terms of your access. I think that had more impact than no one talks about. Also a John Bolton reaction, but I think that has more impact than a single directorate.
Okay, here's a question from Peter, and Peter is asking, we've witnessed some countries, as in Hungary, take advantage of the susceptibility to the virus to enact draconian policies and advance the authoritarian politics of their leaders. Do you think this is a temporary thing, and when the pandemic goes away, which hopefully it does, then we go back? Or have we kind of ratcheted up, and in these countries,
Yeah.
going to be the memory of the virus, and that'll be just as good for the authoritarians as the virus itself.
Right. I think that is a real risk. I think we can't know now. So one of the things that you're seeing is the use of the military in civilian as a civilian in civilian populations is. There is a great piece about this in the Washington Post. In terms of raw numbers, is almost the equivalent of post-World War II era, when the military, obviously just to stabilize civil society. Is that a benign presence? In most countries it is, I will say that. Could it become not benign? Yes, especially I think in countries like Latin America that you're seeing. And there's certainly governments that are going to take advantage of this. So I don't know how it unfolds. I think just back to one of my first points, though, is the image of a functioning democracy that has been part of our strength in national security. And this isn't just because of the virus, but boy, these numbers that we're experiencing in terms of death aren't helping. But I think that is actually likely to give more fuel to the counter narrative that there's something better about authoritarianism or about centralization, about the denigration of rights and stuff. And that to me is about us as well, right? It's about what we're reflecting to the world.
What do you think about the effects here? I think you mentioned earlier in your opening remarks that you've seen the polls that show that increasing support for violations of civil liberties during this time. Lots of people worried about the effects on immigration. The stories in the paper this morning about Trump shutting down immigration. So, is even in our own country, are we going to see a shift again, at least temporarily?
To make clear, I mean, this, this gets a little bit to my flow issue. So Trump, when he just right before I came on, he said that his big tweet about ending immigration was really only a 60-day delay on green card holders. Anyone who's gone through this process knows that's an 8-year process with 60-year delay. So he's going to play to his base for the tweets. There's no way that he's going to do any draconian immigration rules or border enforcement rules, because the airline industry and the cruise industry and the academic institutions and the hotels and the fancy golf clubs like what he owns, none of them will permit it. Because once people start moving, we'll take anyone's cash, right? I mean, so just remember that. So I think it's going to be more based. Once again, I think I think Trump's powerlessness is getting played out, both as a leader, but also a president's powerlessness is the wrong word. A president's need to work within a sort of unity of command structure rather than hierarchical, which other presidents have been able to do in the past. I think that's getting exposed mightily, and it's just whether that plays out in the polls, I don't know. I will say one thing. I'm pretty this is where my civil liberties hat sort of goes out the window. So long as so long as categories are not based on any suspect class like race or national origin or gender or sexual orientation, we're going to want the heavy hand of the state, in particular on the vaccine. We're just going to want, and people who don't take it need to be penalized in meaningful ways. You are not allowed to get a driver's license. You are not allowed to get on an airplane. We cannot have more than 1% of our population have this, right? And so there's going to be people who can't take it because of pre-existing conditions. But I am all for the heavy hand of the state when it comes to creating herd immunity.
So we're going to get our immunity cards and have to show those before we enter public spaces.
Yeah. I mean, so long as it's not, white people get this and non-white. I mean, you can make distinctions in society, rightfully so.
I think we have time for one more, then we need to wrap up.
Fun.
And
Thank you.
the question, I guess I'm going to ask it. It's a combination of a couple of ones that are lingering here. Is okay. You've got 70 or I guess 60 undergraduate students here who want to go out and make a difference, and for whom this is likely one of the defining moments of their young lives.
Yeah, let's hope you don't have any more, because you guys have thrown us for, we thrown you for a loop,
You have a college-age daughter, so but these students, see this and obviously don't want this kind of thing to happen again. They want to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
What is your advice for, somebody who's a junior, senior in college now, looking ahead for a career where they want to make a difference, maybe in the kinds of ways you have, on the kinds of issues you have? What's your advice for them?
Well, and I'd be curious about what Dan thinks too. I mean, so I am a big fan of getting, especially for young people, you get your hands dirty for a little bit. So, I mean, I was a litigator, like in other words, practice your trade if you can for a little bit. So, whatever that is. So, maybe spend some time, volunteering at the Red Cross, or, if you're interested in the space I'm in, or, there, you can get training for incident command and support state and local authorities. Because most of the people you're seeing working are not full-time government employees. They were just part of systems in which you have volunteer. For jobs, I mean, I really think, I think for the next couple years, almost, it'd be hard to imagine a field not impacted by this where you couldn't be helpful, right? Whether it's data management, cybersecurity, diplomacy, military, all of them are going to fall into this. And, but just, I think finally my pitch for going local or state, that you see, if you're interested in Homeland Security, you need to work in the homeland, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Well, that is a great way to wrap up. And I'll say, one of the interesting things about our new normal, I don't know if you can see the group chats, but
no, I can't.
I can see the reactions. And so I'm not only getting questions, but I'm getting kind of fan mail to you saying, so awesome. Thanks for having her.
Thank you.
And so that's not something we normally get to see.
I'm so glad. Yeah, I'm just seeing muted, but I'm not seeing any of the conversations. Well, I'm not going to call her out by name. And she has a different last name, but my niece is on, and I love her very much, and I hope she's doing well. But
that makes you a member of our community, and as a result, we'll have to have you back up again.
Okay, I'd love it in person.
Hopefully, when we can have you up here in person.
Okay,
so
wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.